Well, today I am very excited to speak with Jenny Rogers again. I think we've talked, what, three times
We've talked twice before, yeah.
on this, and then we
Yeah.
got to meet a couple weeks ago, which
Yeah,
is
that
really
was so
nice.
nice. That
Yeah,
was so nice to meet you in person.
it was really great to see you in person too.
Hmm.
And I've really enjoyed the conversations we've had. And something that came up, I should have dived back in and reacquainted myself with how you were in this conversation. But I received this thing about fatness and libraries
Hmm.
from someone who has been watching some of these recordings that I've put out. And I right away thought of you because of something that we talked about in the past. I was like, we've
Oh,
had a
yeah.
conversation around this before. And
Yeah,
I
I
thought,
think it was about the eating disorder field and the meltdown that they had about Lindo Bacon. And
yeah,
yes, yeah.
yeah, which is really fascinating. If people
Hmm.
haven't already watched or looked at that, looked through that controversy.
Yeah, I think I sent you I think it's I can't remember what it's called. It's some pro fat or fat acceptance or some
That
kind of
liberation thing.
something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, there was this big open letter to Lindo Bacon about how she was a white supremacist and basically a terrible person because she had deadlines and was not going to just let somebody else write a book that she has already written. Like, yeah, I think there was another edition of a book that she had written that was coming out, and
Healthy
people
at
were
any
mad.
size.
Yeah,
Health at any size.
health at every size, health at
Yeah.
every size.
Okay.
Uh, and so she was going to do a 20, or they, I guess, is
Oh yeah.
whatever. She was going to
Yeah.
do the 25th anniversary edition of that book. And
Hmm.
people were angry that she was holding power and not allowing somebody else to write it, not understanding like that's not how it works.
Hmm. And I think she also had lost weight. She was
I
slimmer,
don't
right?
I don't know if she lost weight, but I don't think she's ever been fat.
I thought she
So
was formerly heavy and oh
okay,
well,
she maybe, I don't
maybe
know,
I
but
don't.
she would be considered to have a straight size body.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what they call
Um,
it?
yeah,
Really?
it's a
Okay.
new term, a straight size body.
It was really interesting to look through that and see the conversation around weight and
Hmm.
what that is. And I I don't know. It seems it's the same woke language you said a minute ago before we started recording. It marries truth to a lie, which I think
Yeah.
is a really it's a brilliant summary for what it does because there are
Hmm.
truths in this. Like it is,
Yeah.
I think that there's something to be said for a lot of what the woke movement is doing is raising I don't even like using their phrases, but raising awareness
Hmm.
of ways to be compassionate to other people. And I don't see anything wrong with that, but there's something about
Hmm.
the way that it's forced in this it's this very strict, like rigid codifying and resentment building
Hmm.
structure around
Yeah.
building compassion in.
Yeah, and it's the other thing that's weird is that there's this desire to not have any hierarchies, but there's a hierarchical system
Mm-hmm.
where, like with that organization that had a problem with Lindo Bacon, it wasn't just fat people that had a problem with her writing a book on health at every size. It was fat people of color, fat people
Mm.
of color who are disabled, fat people of color who are disabled and identify as queer. And so there's very much this hierarchy. Um, and at the same time, they want to eliminate it. Like they
Mm-hmm.
want to eliminate hierarchies based on merit, but there's this hierarchy based on identity.
Yeah, and the Lindo Bacon, they like you started to say, the organization that had been created that was using the name of the book that she had published
Hmm.
was being run by other people, and they wanted her in her anniversary reprint to hand that over to other people for more representation and more diversity. They wanted her to
Right.
not be the author, but instead allow or the editor or whatever,
Yeah, I
not to
think
get
it'd
the
be the
credit.
author, but
So they
that's
wanted her to just hand it over to
right.
people who were differently abled or different or of
Yeah,
different
different from
ethnic
her. Yeah.
backgrounds. Yeah,
Hmm.
so yeah, it was really strange. It's weird that it's
Yeah.
gotten tied up in this, but this particular presentation that I received is called Fatness and Libraries Amplifying the Voices of Fat Librarians. I believe
Hmm.
that's what it's called. And of fat librarians in DEIA work, and the A stands for accessibility.
Oh, okay.
I had to listen to the presentation to find that out.
I also didn't understand why it's not IDEA.
Ooh, that'd be a good one.
That would make more sense to me.
Uh,
It's kind of like sometimes it's JEDI. It's like
yeah.
justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
IDEA would be better than DEIA. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this presentation is about an hour long. We can put a link in the description here, so if people want to watch it, they can. And it's more of that marrying truth with a lie, because it's somebody did a survey of a bunch of librarians who were heavy women and men who are working in libraries. I still have trouble using the word fat the way that they want to use it. But I appreciate the fact that they're kind of trying to neutralize that word. That's probably a good thing. That's one of the things that's probably coming out of this. That's good, because it shouldn't be shameful to be
Right.
To have a large to be fat. That shouldn't be shameful. It should be neutral to some extent. But one of the things that was going on is they spend a lot of time in the very beginning justifying how being fat is not a disability. But then they spend a lot of time talking about how fat people can't do the same things that everybody else can do. And so we need accommodations.
Right. I noticed that too. There was like, and this is where there's that kernel of truth. Absolutely. People have inherent worth and dignity as human beings, and that's regardless of whatever weight you are. And, for the most part, it's good for employers to have some accessibility for their employees who, may have a really like an injury or a disability. That's all wonderful. That point of them saying that this presenter talking about how she didn't like how fatness was equated with disability, and then talking about needs that some people may have, such as not having library books on the bottom shelf, or not having librarians walk really far, up to a mile, to go in between buildings, or all of the different types of physical activity related to the work. She was talking about how this needs to be more accessible because people can't do it. And so this is where the lie comes in, where people can be healthy at a range of sizes, but there are times when weight is too high or it's too low, and it interferes with mobility, and it interferes with functioning. And that's a problem. And I don't think it's kind to pretend that it's not a problem.
Yeah. And it's there, as this presenter is reading the different responses from the survey participants, there were points where I felt a lot of compassion for these people, because they're describing things that are their inner process, how things are challenging for them, or how they feel embarrassed at times, and how things are difficult. And yet the tone was the overall tone of the presentation was, so that's somebody else's responsibility,
right?
That the responsibility lies with the workplace in order to the survey on professional dress was particularly interesting to me in that regard. It was talking about how people felt embarrassed when they weren't professionally dressed.
Yeah, I bet they do.
But then that was
it.
I
would feel embarrassed. I would feel embarrassed if I didn't have professional dress to go to work. And I've also been in that situation where things don't quite fit me. And it's not because I'm above a certain size. It's because a lot of times I'm between sizes. And so it's hard for me to find something that fits well.
It's true. And when you're in between sizes and something's not fitting well, you can feel a little disheveled or a little less put together. And that's not a good feeling.
Yeah. Or you have fewer items of clothing to work with.
Right.
But again, this is an internal experience that somebody's having, a feeling uncomfortable. And in my mind, you are the person responsible for managing your internal experience, not the world around you. And when the presenter was going through some of the interview information, she talked about how some people seem to have a healthier attitude about things. Like one participant said something like, yeah, I do stand out because I'm fat, and I kind of like that. People know who I am. Like they know, they can recognize me right away. Where she has shifted her thinking about this, and nobody around her did anything. Nobody needed to coddle her, change what they were doing. She shifted what she believed about herself, and that helped. Or even like some of the interview participants were saying things like, oh, I was sweating when I was doing story time and somebody brought me paper towels and I was so embarrassed. I know that they mean well. And the impression I got from the presenter was like, oh, these people who mean well, and that's really not good. But I think erring on the side of somebody meant well is healthier than assuming that they meant ill.
Yeah, and that tone was present throughout from the presenter. Maybe the one you said who didn't mind standing out, who had come to that. I don't know if that was the same respondent, but it might have been. There was one who said, I feel like it makes me more accessible. People find me more approachable. People who are different in their own way see me as someone they can come to and talk to. So that was a really nice example of self-acceptance and finding something positive. And so there were those as well, for sure. In the very beginning, and I wonder, I didn't timestamp this. I should have timestamped it so I could have gone right to it. But early on, I guess one of the things that jumped out at me in this video was the social justice language, or the DEI language. It is so strange, the way that they word things, and there's like this ever-present dissociation from the physical body that I notice in this, where they talk about that you're performing tasks in a fat body.
Right. And yes, I wrote that down.
Did you write that down too? Yeah.
Like, it's not that you're in a fat body. Like, you are your body.
Yeah.
I'm not in a body. I am my body. And there may be some people who have spiritual beliefs and they think that they're more than just that. Okay. But yeah, it's not like you zip up a meat suit and go to work.
Yeah. I wonder, can you identify what it is about that that's so troubling? Because for me, it seems like it smacks of dissociation. There's something really
it separates the
it.
person from that physical experience of being embodied.
Yeah. And what does that lead to? Is that a way of thinking about your body as this ultimately transformable thing? Is that some sort of a transhumanist priming? What is that? I mean, maybe I'm going too far down the road with that, but it's just
I'm already down that rabbit hole. So
okay. It's very strange. And I've thought about this in regards to like the gender issue and transgender medicine, and how it's on the spectrum of cosmetic surgery. You know, it's
not just more like it is cosmetic surgery.
Well, it's on I guess cosmetic manipulation of oneself, right? So it's like you've got anything from do I dye my hair or wear makeup, all the way down to did I get a nose job or get my breast augmentation, or do I do sex reassignment surgery? You know, there's this whole thinking about the body as like Lego parts that I can move and change. And so there's something about the woke language around being in a body, performing things in a body.
Which is so interesting, because that reminds me of people's belief in a soul, like a soul is in a body. But most of the people who are critical social justice oriented, I'm painting with a broad brush, but many people are not.
They're secular.
Right. Many people are secular. They don't believe in souls. And yet.
And yet you're in a body.
You're in a body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. I wonder if I'd love to understand better, be able to better articulate what it is about that seems so disturbing.
Yeah. I think the other thing that disturbs me is, especially when it comes to transgenderism and some of the surgeries, is none of this is functional. Like you can get breast implants those are not functional breasts. You can get a phalloplasty that is not a functional penis. You can get a vaginoplasty that's not a vagina.
Mhm.
It is changing the body, but it's not improving function. It's actually decreasing function.
Mhm.
It's
It's
detrimental to
it's
health.
cosmetic only. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 Well, and that's I know we're on a tangent now
Hmm.
from the Fat Liberation Library.
Right.
But it is interesting to think about this as a form of body dysmorphia,
Hmm.
and the to what extent is it healthy to try to align the body, and when is it healthy to try to align the body with the I guess the emotional expectations or desires. Like I could say if someone had a cleft lip,
Hmm.
it seems like most of us would say, yeah, it's good to go ahead and fix that, even if it's not
Hmm.
causing functional problems. Maybe it's or if someone has some kind of a congenital deformity that
Hmm.
isn't affecting function but really does stand out and makes them feel embarrassed. I mean, most people would be on board with changing that. And
Hmm.
at what point is that, where do we cross that line? And it seems like there's room to draw that line in different places for different people.
Hmm.
And I find that to be a really interesting
Hmm.
topic of exploration. But all the way
Yeah.
down to this gender surgeries that are really hurting the function of the body. Yet what
Hmm.
you have now sacrificed function for form.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. And even with the fatness, there's this belief that the only reason that health is associated with weight is because of some, I don't know if it's like a heteropatriarchal, I don't know, like a word salad of bigotry and discrimination.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, health is just, or weight is just one data point associated with health. Somebody can be within a healthy weight range and very unhealthy. Somebody can be at a higher end of a healthy weight range and be absolutely fine. However, like, there are health issues associated with being too low of a weight that your body needs or too
Mhm.
high.
Mhm.
And not I don't there's just this dishonesty about it
Mhm.
that really bothers me. It's almost like if we believe it to be true, it's true.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it is it there is that dishonesty, and I coming back to the idea of it's not a disability,
Hmm.
but I can't reach the bottom shelf,
Right. I
and I
can't I
don't
can't
want
crouch
to.
down.
Yeah, and I also don't want to perform my job in front of people because I don't want them to see me, or things like this that really limit
Hmm.
one's range within a
Hmm.
profession or a
Hmm.
professional role. That leaves an employer in a really difficult position because they're having to make special accommodations for someone, but I imagine that there's grants and things for disabilities that are provided that wouldn't be if this is not a disability. It's a whole conversation right there.
Hmm.
That gap between I'm not disabled, but I can't do the things that everybody else can do.
Right. Or if I can do it, I'm doing it in an incredibly sweaty in a way that somebody else would not be.
Hmm.
That would indicate that your body is working maybe harder
Overtaxed.
than it. Yeah.
Hmm. Well,
Yeah.
so I can show a little bit of this,
Hmm.
and then I'd love to hear your notes too. So
Okay.
maybe we can just go into this a little bit. All right. All right. Are you seeing this on the screen now?
Yep.
Okay.
Hmm.
So let's see. This is the video of Fatness in Libraries, amplifying the voices of fat librarians at work. And I'm going to turn it way down because I didn't save a timestamp, but I really wanted to get to. There's this one screen where they really go into like warnings for
Was this like the trigger warning?
the
Do
trigger.
what you need to do, doodle and wiggle and color and knit.
Yeah, that was in the beginning of it, but this part right here, let me see where we are.
To take
Oh,
good
right.
care of yourselves.
Oh, this one. Yeah,
With these
I'm going to go back a little bit further because this is where
to weight changes and restrictive eating.
this
I have
She gives a
This
big warning.
presentation is indeed focused specifically on fatness. However, fatness cannot be examined or interpreted in isolation, as our bodies and identities are shaped by and expressed in many ways. I therefore focus on fatness with an emphasis on intersectionality in my work. So while I will speak directly to fatness, it's possible that you may recognize and relate to some of the quotes and themes described from a multitude of identity-informed perspectives. I hope that this encourages you to work in solidarity with fat people and all others who experience oppression and bias in library work and beyond. Finally, I do want to note that this presentation will include quotes from fat librarians that refer briefly to weight changes and restrictive eating. I have redacted or chosen not to share any quotes with specific weights, calories, or diets in order to minimize potential harm. However, I do want you to know that these topics will at least briefly be discussed. In this regard, and others throughout this presentation, I encourage everyone, but especially fat folks, to take good care of yourselves. With these notes on terminology and content in mind, let's...
Okay. So that was the part I just wanted to kind of give a sample of the way that this is the way this is presented the entire way through.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a warning. It is, you're going to hear talk about restricting calories and about weight loss. Take care of yourself. We're going to minimize harm. We've tried to minimize harm. Take good care of yourself. You can't, like, this is going to be really hard for you to hear, that people might sometimes want to lose weight.
Right. And that's not harmful. It may be uncomfortable, but discomfort and harm are not the same thing.
Right. I haven't listened to one of these in a while. I have not been, I've thankfully kind of transcended that part of my life where I was being forced to listen to the woke stuff when I was in school. I feel like I have a nice barrier. So diving back into this and listening to an hour of this kind of talk, it is really strange. It's this really strange woke speak, this corporate woke speak. And it makes me question my reality sometimes. I think if I want to, it has this effect on me. Like if I want to call this out and say this is wrong, there's this really, it's just the way she presents it is so nonchalantly. This is just how this is, and
it's NPR sexy mommy voice.
Yeah, yeah.
That kind of mommy voice, but also a little breathy and sexy, and we're gonna be talking about really difficult things.
Okay, you've got me mesmerized. I can't.
So that's an interesting word to use, mesmerized.
Yeah. Anton Mesmer.
Yeah.
Hypnosis.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a certain cadence and a certain tone, and like it's very much in, I mean, I haven't listened to NPR in probably since summer of 2020, but there is a certain cadence and a certain tone and a certain fake gentleness, and it's a little icky.
So I know we're going all over the place as we think about this, but I think it's important. I think what you're bringing up is important. I noticed I flew, I traveled a bunch the last month or so. I was on a bunch of flights, and I started to notice flight attendants have this cadence when they do their speed. They're like, and so if everybody can just sit in their seat, we'll be right there. It's like this, like, and it feels like it's teachers. Yeah. And I wonder if it's like a way of talking that increases compliance.
Could be.
It makes people feel comfortable. You're in charge, and it's just like, you're going to listen to me.
And it's very much a maternal figure kind of. So you're in charge, and you're also somebody who might be comforting. You're in charge, but not in a masculine way.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, what were your main takeaways as you listened to this presentation? What did you think?
So the main takeaway, a big one for me, was this focus on people not being responsible for their own internal processes, that if they are feeling uncomfortable or ashamed or embarrassed or worried, that it's really important for the employer to step in and make some changes to policy so that people don't have to experience these difficult internal feelings, thoughts, physical sensations. There's very much this focus on there needs to be an external solution.
Mhm.
And if people are uncomfortable being fat, I certainly don't think that the solution is necessarily weight loss. For some people, it might help. For some people, that might help health, that might help mobility, but not for everybody.
Mhm.
And people aren't responsible for making you feel comfortable. Like, this
Mhm.
is your responsibility as an adult to, if somebody is making comments, or if somebody, like, one of the respondents said that librarians said colleagues didn't comment directly on their bodies, but that wasn't necessary, as they could tell what they were thinking.
I definitely, that stood out to me. Yeah.
As opposed to then challenging that and saying, you're really mind reading. It's possible that people are thinking that. It's also possible that you yourself are thinking this. And the thought that it is coming from inside the house, inside you, is really painful. And it's much easier to think, oh, that is coming from other people.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was my big takeaway, was this desire to change everything around in terms of an employer, changing policies, changing the culture at work, really focusing on those externals as opposed to focusing on internals. And this is what we as fat people can do to be more comfortable in the workplace. Don't mind read. If people are engaged in diet talk that you don't like, you can say something like, hey, I just want to eat my lunch in peace. I don't really want to hear about your intermittent fasting. Yeah, a lot of the focus was on other people changing things
Mhm.
so that fat people can feel comfortable. What about you? What were your takeaways?
Yeah, I definitely noticed that too. It seemed like she was using these to build a narrative of this is really difficult. This experience is really difficult for these people for all
Mm-hmm.
these reasons. And I get the thing that I guess I felt like I was thinking as I was listening to this is I think that's valid to bring that up and
Mm-hmm.
demonstrate how if the purpose of the survey is just to sort of describe an experience for other people to gain some empathy, that's
Mm-hmm.
one thing. But it concludes with this whole, we need to advocate and we need to supply and we need to create workplace environments that mitigate for these things. And it's very caretaking. It's very external locus of control. And
Right.
when you're talking about the diet language at work, that was
Mm-hmm.
one of the things you pointed this out, I think, before we hit record, but how it was making workplace rules around what kind of conversations are okay.
Right.
And
Like, you
that,
can't police everything.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes it might be totally okay to talk about
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. Maybe, you end up making friends at work a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
time. You talk about the things that are topical for you
Right.
going on in your life. And for some people, that might be a part of their life.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that caretaking was really a big takeaway.
Right. Yeah, they, one of the takeaways was they wanted people to add fatness to their diversity plan. And the presenter said something about employers helping their, fat employees feel proud. And I thought,
Hmm.
well,
Is
why
that
is that
really
an
the
employer's
employer's
job?
job? Yeah.
Right. I don't think that's the employer's job.
No.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Widespread discrimination with minimal protections. And they talked about institutionalized anti-fatness, that it's
Hmm.
just, I thought it was interesting that I don't know if it wasn't a main point, but it did kind of jump out at me that she wanted to move away from the term fat phobia
Hmm.
because she was making the point that phobias are
Right. Mental
mental illnesses.
illnesses. And
And
she didn't want to equate that with,
yeah, with
yeah,
bigotry. which is,
Right.
that was the turn. That was interesting.
Mhm.
I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then she kind of flipped it. And
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking at my notes here. There was one that who talked about a coworker who thought that large people were lazy or didn't do anything. So she felt like she needed to kind of fight that by being extra active and not sitting idly for too long.
Mhm.
And I don't know, maybe I'm just quibbling with one person's anecdote, but you're at work, so maybe you shouldn't be sitting idly for too long at
Right.
work anyway. But
Yeah.
there were a lot of those kind of things where you didn't get to engage back with the anecdote and they were just
Right.
dropped. And
Yeah. Well, and I think, it goes back to, we can't control people's perceptions of us.
mhm,
And when you accept that, it's really freeing.
mhm,
People might think that you're lazy. They might think that you're fat. They might think that you're ugly or you're dumb or all sorts of things. They might think that you're sexy.
mhm,
You can't control other people's perceptions of you.
mhm,
And it just seems like trying to do that is not a good use of energy.
mhm. I think that's I think that's the best point probably to make from all of this. It's instead of trying to help the individual to come to terms with their own experience and work to accept themselves and to be comfortable and not be
Mhm.
so plagued by fear of judgment.
Mhm.
It's externalizing that and telling everybody else to stop judging this person. And
Mhm.
it plays right into the fears of the person who feels like they're being judged as well.
Well, and it also, even if everybody around that person stopped judging them, that doesn't take away the internal experience they might have or that internal fear that people are.
Mhm. Mhm.
That can still be there if there is self-judgment.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think for a lot of people who are overweight or fat or however
Mhm.
the politically correct way to talk about this, whatever that is, you mentioned for some people weight loss might be a good option, might
Yeah.
be healthier for them.
Mhm.
And for some people, it may be next to impossible for them. Maybe they've really been trying. So there's a point at which you have to accept yourself the way you are, even if you are moving to something new, even if you're moving towards a goal.
Mhm.
Maybe that goal is weight loss and maybe it's not. But in the
Mhm.
process, you are where you are. And there's a need to be able to live with yourself the way that you are in that moment at that time.
Mhm.
And yeah, it just seems like this goes a really strange direction.
Mhm. Well, and this is what I see all over the place with critical social justice, this
Mhm,
desire to, let's change everything externally so that people don't feel bad about themselves.
mhm,
And again, I mean, there's a kernel of truth in every one of these movements.
mhm,
Of course there's racism, of course there's sexism, of course there's homophobia. Yes,
mhm, mhm,
people have experienced really terrible things. And also, you cannot control how people think of you.
mhm,
Some people are going to have very negative thoughts about you, and
mhm,
you can still live a good life.
mhm,
If they're not acting, if they're not acting in a bad way, well,
mhm.
you can't even control your own thoughts. How are you going to control somebody else's thoughts?
Yeah, I was speaking with someone the other day who was really troubled by it wasn't about fatness, but just about personal choices and worrying about what people will think. What will people
Hmm.
think? This, that, a young person. And when I was listening to what this person was concerned about and where they were getting their perspective or where they were hearing things that were troubling to them, it was internet. It was
Hmm.
reading comments on social media, the way people
Hmm.
talk. There's such a bluntness. It's like I think about before there was social media, there was this idea of the anonymity that we experience when we're driving in cars, and we
Mhm.
get so mad at the guy in front of us when he does XYZ, which we might not have gotten as mad about if we could see his face and humanize
Right.
him.
Mhm.
And as I've been on social media more over this past year, I have seen that it's really like
It's
the
played out the past 2 weeks, Leslie.
oh, I know. Hasn't it though? It's really interesting. People really they can't
Mhm.
just have a disagreement
Right.
and talk about the issue, talk it
Right.
through. They have to
Yeah.
like throw all kinds
Vitriol
of
and
yeah, and
yeah.
generalizations.
Right.
And even just thinking to some of the different there's this one in I don't, you're on Twitter. So there's
Mhm.
this one Twitter account that I think is just gratuitous trolling mostly,
Mhm.
but it's a woman who does pro man stuff, but it's not really very
Oh, I think
pro.
I know
You
who
know
you're
who I'm
talking
talking
about.
about? I
Yeah.
don't want to
Yeah.
give them any press
Right.
because
Yep.
it's or
Yep.
her any press because it's I
Yeah.
don't want to I don't
Right.
engage with it, but I see it and I see other people
Yeah.
engaging, and so I see the reposts and stuff. And this
Right.
girl, she's just posting like the most hateful stuff about women, and it's
Mhm.
like rage porn.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
watch as people engage back with it, and it's like there's this part of us that wants to play in that area. That's the sandbox we want to play in. Just like
Mhm.
jump in and throw insults and have mic drops and zingers and it's really interesting. And I wonder to what extent being in that online culture is starting to put those kind of neuroses in people's minds,
Yeah, it's
thinking
like the
about
eye
how
of
they're
Sauron is always on you.
yeah. It doesn't seem like it's a healthy thing for us to be thinking that much about what other people perceive.
Right. I remember I used to, some of the work I do is with eating disorders. You know, I'm a psychotherapist, and I was working with a mentor. And I was talking about my fears of my patients judging my body, and she laughed and she said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's going to happen."
Hmm.
And that's just a healthier attitude. Don't worry about it. People will judge you.
Hmm.
It's going to happen.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's true. It's true. People will think what they're going to think.
Hmm.
And also, oftentimes, they're not thinking that much about you because they're more worried about themselves anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I
Mhm.
always think I wish people knew. I wish people knew that they're not important. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't mean like you're not important, people don't care
Mhm.
about you, but like you're not that important and people aren't thinking about you. That could be very freeing.
Mhm.
Like if you trip in a room in front of people, they might notice and then they're not going to remember it. They're not going to care.
Mhm. Mhm.
If you wear a blue dress to a conference, a lot of people might care and have many opinions about it. And you also don't have to let that bother you.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't talked to you at all about what you think about that. I don't know if you want to
Yeah,
go there, but you're
we
welcome to if
can.
you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I I think the big kerfuffle is interesting because in my perception, it's not people who attended the conference who had a big problem with it. It was all of these people who saw things online
Mhm.
and made a lot of assumptions like how could Jen Specht invite Phil? I don't think he was invited. I think he paid admission for a ticket and attended.
Hmm. I
And
don't know the
yeah, I
either
mean,
way. Yeah, but
right. But like,
he wasn't a speaker. He wasn't,
no, he wasn't
yeah,
a speaker.
or on a
And
panel or anything. Yeah.
right, his choice of dress was odd. It's not what I would choose to wear to a conference. I'm not a dress gal.
Mhm.
Um, it- there were several people at the conference who I wasn't really comfortable interacting with, and so I didn't.
Mhm.
And that's a choice everybody has. And
Mhm.
that's discomfort for a variety of reasons, some of which some people were drinking really heavily and sloppy drunk.
Mhm.
And I don't particularly like that, but it's you are going to run into people who make you uncomfortable.
Mhm.
If people are not breaking a law, there is little that you can do.
Mhm.
I do think we need to return to some social norms that we had. and some laws that we had to protect women's spaces, women's sports, women's prisons, etc. But there's not a law against wearing a dress to a conference.
Yeah.
And you may come across people who are wearing things that aren't appropriate for events, and you have to deal with your own discomfort.
Well, and I haven't been, the quality of the arguments has been something interesting. I said something about that kind of offhandedly in the conversation I had with Aaron Kinsfater this morning, and we did a live stream. So somebody responded back to my comment and said, well, you haven't been watching the feminist critiques where they really are giving good arguments. And okay, that's true. I haven't. I've just seen a lot of really angry, and I had my entire, like one of my YouTube videos, just tons of really nasty comments about this stuff, and it's not being done with. I think that one of the things to keep in mind is, if we're going to say a man can't wear a dress, where do we start drawing that line? Where do we draw that? Because then, are you also going to take a hard line stand on the trans people that attend, who are actually post-surgical trans people who are, male to female and come in women's clothing and presenting feminine? Some you may not be able to tell because they are passing very well, and others you will be able to tell because they're not passing as well. So is that going to be, is that the place to draw the line? And men, we're going to check your birth certificate and make sure that you're wearing what you, and then there's what about the trans, the female to male? Because
and there were
they
several
pass
at the
very
conference.
well usually. Very well. And so are you going to tell them that they have to wear what is women's clothing? Because women get to dress across the spectrum very you can wear anything. You can wear masculine clothes, feminine clothes, and it's all women's clothing. And so I feel like I don't see what you could really do differently unless you want to start drawing those lines. And that's a difficult line to draw. And it doesn't matter what I think about autogynephilia to make that argument. That doesn't, I have questions about what is autogynephilia. Is it something that's more associated with autism or narcissism? Is there some, what is this? I don't know. But that's an entirely separate discussion. But if we're talking about regulating what is appropriate where, I think that you can go into some really, you can get some really dangerous places really quickly.
Well, and I think I understand the argument that some people are making, that these types of things, specifically AGP, is something that is more out in society. And there are men who are dangerous to women, and they are trying to get into women's spaces. And I get the concern of, like, if we allow this, you're kind of having a green light for other people who may, try to infringe on women's spaces.
But that's a slippery slope argument, which is a rhetorical fallacy. So is this behavior actually wrong? Or is this behavior just similar?
Actually really slippery?
Is it? Yeah. Because if we're talking strictly behavior, we already have, do we? I don't know. Do we have a rule around who can go into women's spaces? But if we want to make that rule, this guy wasn't violating that. Let's say that's in place, but he wasn't pretending to be a woman.
No, he wasn't pretending to be a woman. He wasn't using the ladies' room, as far as I know. And so I guess that's where, when I look at Twitter and I see people so angry, like, what did you want people to practically do in that moment where you have somebody attending a conference, their dress is unusual, they identify as an autogynephile, they're very open about this, he's written a book about this, he is not pretending to be a woman, he's not infringing in women's spaces. What does the organization practically do in that moment? There are a lot of people who are attending who attended the conference who work with people with AGP, who work with trans people, whether they have medicalized or not. This is part of our world, and maybe some people have greater levels of comfort with that than others. It's not surprising somebody like Phil attended the conference. We are talking about gender issues, and it's kind of like, I don't know, being mad that somebody brings pom-poms to a cheerleading conference. Like, okay, you're going to expect that. It wasn't unexpected to see people who were in different levels of transition or detransition, or people who like to dress in gender nonconforming ways, or people who identify as autogynephiles.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to draw boundaries around behavior than something like this.
Right. Yeah. And it's also this desire for purity that some people were saying, he should have been thrown out. Okay. Because there's this desire to have the conference be this pure something. I don't know.
Yeah. I just wonder how do you draw that line? I mean, because it does seem like some of it gets into thought policing, which I think is also a very dangerous place to try to regulate. I mean, he says he's autogynephilic, which informs he says that autogynephilia, according to his theory, is behind most of, or the largest number of trans
male to female.
Yeah, male to female. And he even identifies it the other way around too, but he claims that it's the motivating factor behind people's decision to transition. So that's not to say that it is a direct practice of your sexual behavior. It is saying that it informs your desire to then live a certain way and dress a certain way and want to be a certain way. But it's behind that thing. And so if he were doing something inappropriate sexually, that would be a really clear line to draw. But just dressing, just having a fashion choice, if that's your everyday wear, would that be okay if you claimed that you weren't autogynephilic? If you said, I'm not, I'm just gay and I like to dress this way, I'm absolutely not autogynephilic, this is just my fashion, would that be okay? But if you admit that you have these certain thoughts, then it's not okay. And that seems like kind of where we're going with this conversation. Well, he said he's autogynephilic, which means that he's practicing a fetish. But so the other people who were dressing gender nonconforming or had taken steps to medically transition, because we don't know how they relate to the concept of auto, as he would call it, auto heterosexuality. We don't know if there's a sexual component for them, because they haven't talked about that out loud. So is that okay, just because we don't know the contents of their mind? And it seems like there's some level of permissibility around that, as long as it's not stated. It's like you can't say the quiet part out loud. And
which is what we want people to be able to do.
To be able to do. Yeah. To be able to be. And even if we were to end gender ideology, like today, even if we stopped doctors from performing surgeries or prescribing hormones and stop teaching this to kids, we have now a couple of generations of people who are going to be going through life with some degree of surgical alteration or ideological conviction. And so it's going to take a while, even if it were to end, it's going to take a while to work through the culture. And we have to somehow figure out how to live with people. We can't draw that purity line. We're going to have that nonconformity and that ambiguity around us. And I don't think that we can get into a space where we start to police people's dress based on reading their mind. We have to read their behavior, not their.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a strange thing, though. It is strange.
It is. It's all weird. I guess bottom line is, you cannot control other people. You can control yourself. You can control. You can deal with your own experience, and you don't always have to interact with other people, and you cannot control what they're thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that it's good to get a little internet cleanse once in a while to help with that.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on the fatness in
librarians?
libraries? Yeah, fat librarians.
I don't think so. I think that's about it. I think I thought it was weird. It's the presenter started off by saying librarians need to be prepared to participate in and lead conversations about fatness in their work. I don't know why.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, but the fat librarians or just all librarians?
I don't know. I don't know
Because it seems like they're saying here, we're going to tell you how fat librarians feel so that they don't have to tell you, so that you can advocate for them. So maybe this is supposed to be shifting the burden.
Yeah, I don't know. But
it sounds like
I thought
fat
that
education.
was interesting. Right. Librarians need to be prepared to participate in and lead conversations about fatness and their work.
That sounds like activism and advocacy.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for having a conversation with me about this. I knew it would be interesting to look at this together.
Yeah.
And what are you up to right now? And do you want to plug anything?
Well, I am a therapist and licensed in Illinois and Texas. I see people in person in Illinois and also through telehealth. I also started a coaching business, haven't done really anything with that, but that would be more for people who don't need psychotherapy, but need some help. So it could be, I am in a school program and my peers are driving me kind of batty and I need some help getting through it. It could be, I've got Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up and I need to go, I'm spending some time with my family and my dad's an active alcoholic. How do I get through the holidays? So if you need any individual short-term help, you can contact me for coaching. I may be doing some groups in the future for grandparents or siblings. If they have, people in their family who identify as trans, that's something that I'm starting to play around with, maybe some groups in the future. But if people are looking for therapy or coaching, they can contact me. I can give you my contact info that you can put in the show notes.
Absolutely. You want to say it out loud real quick so that for anybody who's just listening?
Yeah, you can email me at info@jennyrogerstherapy.com.
Okay, great. Well, I'll definitely put that link in the notes as well for people.
All right.
Thanks again, Jenny.
Yeah, this is nice.
Yeah, it's nice to talk with you.
All right.